He made me cry. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be here with you, and I love the music. That's what I listen to before I get up to preach. So thank you, musicians. Thank you all for the honor of your presence. And I'd like to just say thank you guys for coming back after lunch. I'd like to introduce you to my wife, who's watching online. I love you, honey. She prayed with me just before, and she's been my bride for, it'll be 45 years in May. And I love you, Carol. And so she and I have been praying for you and for this day that it would fill your hearts to overflowing and be life-giving for you. Well, let me tell you about someone else. He is still the all-time leading Division I men's scorer. And he played 10 years in the NBA. And at the age of 40, Pistol Pete Maravich, who at the time was a young follower of Jesus Christ, he was a picture of seemingly perfect health. And he died suddenly during a pickup basketball game. The cause of death was a rare heart defect. You see, a person's athletic ability doesn't always reflect the condition of his or her heart. Here's another photo for you. Two-time Olympic gold medalist Sergei Grinkov, who's going to be pictured here in just a moment, with his wife, was practicing on ice with her in upstate New York when he suddenly collapsed and he died of a heart attack at age 28. Doctors found that Grinkov had severely clogged arteries that were the size of a pinhole for the blood to flow through. A person's athletic ability does not always reflect the condition of his or her heart. I have one more story for you that is very close to my heart. We could have that now. Last May, my wife Carol was admitted to the hospital by a concerned ER doc who was erring to the side of caution due to some symptoms that she was having and a lab result that raised some concern. And so as a result of her 2-night hospital stay, she had a coronary angiogram, which, as you can see, your honorary cardiologist, reveals no narrowing of blood vessels or blockages, and we are so thankful to God for his kindness. In fact, when people ask, well, how was her angiogram? I'll say her arteries are as wide open as the German Autobahn, and we are thankful. Now, you don't have to be an interventional cardiologist from Spectrum Health to see a common theme in the first 250 words or so that I've shared with you, that I've spoken about Pistol Pete and Sergei Grinkov and Carol Harris. The common theme, though, is a healthy heart, and I want to have a conversation with you today about keeping your heart healthy. But I'm not talking about the fist-shaped sized organ that sits about here and that pumps blood through your body. I'm talking about the other heart that's deep inside of you. It's what makes you, you. Now, this cardiology lesson we're going to engage in together is from a fictitious father and mother, and they're talking to their son, and they share a proverb with him to teach him how to live wisely in life. And you might be wondering, well, what is a proverb? A proverb, I'm glad you asked, is a short, pithy couplet, and it takes truth and it condenses the truth about life into a highly concentrated, memorable way. The very best proverbs are those which say the most in the fewest number of words. So when it comes to a proverb, a little goes a long, long way. We speak proverbs every time we make statements like, don't approach a goat from the front, a horse from the back, or a fool from any side. Or this one, after all is said and done, more is said than done. So here's today's proverb for you from the fictitious parents. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. What does it mean to guard your heart? This word guard refers to watching and standing guard and keeping a sharp lookout for someone or something in custody to protect from an enemy from the outside. It's a place under guard, a prison under guard. And so that begs a question. Why is it important to guard your heart? Now, we know that the heart is the real you, but why is it so important to guard the real you, to guard your heart? Why is guarding your heart the highest priority in your life? The end of the proverb tells us, for everything that you do flows from it. Now, imagine with me, it's late spring, and you and I are in Rocky Mountain National Park, not far from Estes Park. And there is a rushing, cold mountain stream beside us as we walk a mountain trail. And just as the stream is flowing from the melting deep snows that are at a higher elevation, everything that you and I do and say flows from our hearts. Now, this reminds me of the words of Jesus written by Dr. Luke. You may have heard of him, where Jesus gives us the reason why people do evil things. Luke chapter 6, verse 45, a good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart. And an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. What you say flows from what is in your heart. Everything flows from my heart. My thoughts, my feelings, my values, my choices, my priorities, my beliefs, my aspirations, my pursuits all flow from in here, my heart. Now, we know that a person's athletic ability does not always reflect the condition of his or her heart. But our external behavior does reflect the condition of our heart. Eventually, the unresolved issues that you and I have rattling around in us, undetected, will eventually work their way to the surface. So listen to me now. What we try to hide will show up everywhere. Now, left to our own natural state, our hearts are really messed up. Bob Merritt gave us many examples of his messed up heart this morning. Thank you, Bob. And I must say, if I had been on a bicycle with Bob, I would have done exactly what Bob did. Are there any other sickos here? But there is hope for our hearts to be made new by the power of God. And if you become a follower of Jesus Christ, as Jeff Mannion described in our first session this morning, you receive a new heart with good qualities that need to be guarded and protected and nourished. And so the command, guard your heart, implies that you and I can know something of what's in our hearts. That means that you can examine your heart and you can evaluate your heart. And if it were not true, what sense would it make to tell us to guard our hearts? But how do you guard something that you can't even see? how can you keep a close check on your heart? Now, guard your heart. It's great advice, but it's very general advice. But what does it look like to guard your heart when you slip on your metallic kicks and you pair them with your sustainable statement blazer and you leave your townhouse to go have dinner with your friends? I'm going to answer that question for you now in a very personal way. How have I guarded my heart? Now, looking around this room, I feel like I can trust most of you. And so I'm going to take a risk and get personal with you and open my heart to you and share with you how I've guarded my heart. We guard our hearts in different ways in different seasons of life. And as I look at my life, I'll be 67 years old in June. As I look at my life, the story of my life can be divided into 6 seasons. And today I'm going to pull the ripcord and we're going to parachute into seasons 4 and 5. These 2 seasons of my life spanned almost 30 years of leading 2 churches. And my goal now is not to share everything that unfolded during these decades, all the joys and all the sorrows, all the laughter and all the tears, all the graces and all the traumas. My focus is on my heart during each season. So let's start with this season, season 5. That's me when I was young and had a creepy mustache. According to my second born, my daughter, Dad, that was creepy. The year is 1992, and I reluctantly moved my young family to the Cleveland area to serve as the lead pastor of a struggling, racially divided church of about 70 people. And when the search committee interviewed me, they said that if I did not come, they were planning to close the church. We went kicking and screaming. Who wants to live in Cleveland? Why would I want to go there? The lake caught fire. The river caught fire. The Browns are... The first year was very difficult and very discouraging. I was leading a shrinking, sick, divided church, and then after 1 year of segregation and bickering and grumbling and criticizing and people leaving, in the kindness of God, the church started a slow and steady climb to spiritual and emotional and relational health. And it started growing numerically on a consistent and steady trajectory, except for one crazy, insane 18 months when the size of the church doubled in an 18-month period, right in the middle of the journey. And we were a diverse church, 50% white, 45% black, 5% from other backgrounds, lots of interracial marriages in the church like my own. We had people with PhDs and others without a high school diploma. We had truck drivers and scientific researchers and physicians and plumbers and artists and educators and engineers and assembly line workers. And people, newborn to old age, came from the city and the suburbs and the countryside. And the church grew on the foundation of relationships more than programs. And so the relationships ran deep. The centrality of the Bible and of worship and the deep relationships led to a unity that was so remarkable. We knew that it had to come from God. And after year 1, over the next 13 years, If someone were to ask me, hey, how's the church going? My most frequent answer was this: we're having fun. We're having fun loving God and loving people and seeing people's lives transform. Now, there were some struggles and challenges along the way, but for the most part, it was a dynamic season unlike anything I have personally ever experienced. Well, word of the 180-degree turnaround started spreading. Other churches started contacting me to ask, would you consider becoming our lead pastor in our church? And other churches wanted to come and visit us and study what we were doing and how we were doing it. I was asked to offer workshops around the subject. And so while leading this church in my mid-30s and my 40s, I was living my dream. There are different kinds of temptations to the heart when your life and your leadership are going well. Do you want to guess what the first and primary enemy was that I had to guard my heart against during that season of fruitfulness and impact? It was pride. Perhaps you've heard of it. Maybe pride has knocked on the door of your heart once or twice. If it hasn't, it probably will. So how did I guard my heart from pride during this dynamic season of numerical growth from 1 to 2 to 3 worship services? The way I'm wired, I don't like that Saturday night, Sunday morning thing. It's not for me. So I started at 7:50 a.m. and went back to back to back and had to be done by 1 o'clock when the Browns came on. So during that season, I repeatedly reminded myself to give God the credit and the recognition for what was happening. I would stand in worship services singing and weeping because I was living the dream. And I would repeat to myself the biblical truth over and over and over. Let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. And that leaves no room for pride. I fought pride and guarded my heart by giving honor to whom honor was due. Pastor Bud Lee, who's now in heaven, one of my predecessors at that church, was a visionary leader who paid a high price, a very high price, of initially leading the church into the space of gospel-driven racial reconciliation and diversity in the mid-1970s. Many of you weren't even born then. He was ahead of his time. And each time Pastor Lee would come to town to visit, I'd see him in the worship service, and I would publicly acknowledge, Pastor Lee is with us today. We thank you so much for your courage and your commitment and your vision. And he would just stand there and just weep. He was committed to loving all people in the 1970s when I was desegregating the high school I attended. So in the 1970s, Bud Lee planted. In the 1980s, Mike Peterson watered. And now in the 1990s and the early 2000s, God was making the church grow and produce fruit. And I happen to have the privilege of sitting in the front passenger seat and watching God show off. But in addition to Pastor Lee, I showed honor to others. Dick and Margie, who are now both in heaven, and Norm, who's now in heaven, and Wendella, and Connie, who is now in heaven, and many others for their sacrifices to set the table for us. Giving honor helped guard my heart against pride. I also repeatedly reminded myself that everything that you and I have is a gift from God. What do you have that you did not receive? And if you received it, why do you boast as if you did not? The church was loaded with talented instrumental and vocal musicians leading us in worship, like these unbelievably gifted and talented leaders. There were composers, There were Cleveland Orchestra members. There were music conservatory students. There were music professors and performance-level singers. And I repeatedly reminded myself that Nate and Ed and Sharon and Brooke and Gayla and Mark and Brian and Molly and Michael and Peggy and Ruth Marie and Christina and many more were just generous gifts from God's hand to us. The repeated reminder guarded my heart from pride. I also tried to be an example, an intentional example of following the example of Jesus Christ and seek to put others ahead of myself and intentionally humble myself and serve them instead of seeking to be served. The Apostle Paul puts it this way in Philippians 2. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble. Thinking of others as better than yourself. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. And so to this end, there were times that I would clean the bathrooms at church, shovel the snow, take out the trash. On Sunday mornings, those cold, early Sunday mornings, we had too many people coming to fit on our parking lot. I would park 2 or 3 blocks away from the church in the neighborhood and walk to church as a reminder for me to serve others and look out for their interests. I didn't want, no offense to anyone who has this in their church, I didn't want a parking spot by the door. From my heart, to guard my heart, I needed to walk. This practice helped me guard my heart. Something else I would do in this season is I would go to a big place and spend time with God in prayer. I love being outdoors and surrounded by the majesty of God, whether it's in the mountains, I love them, or the ocean, or the forest. And I guarded my heart by spatially reminding myself of the greatness and the immensity and the majesty and the might and the power of God. And in that space, I would spend time in prayer with him, visually reminded of how dependent I am on God. My favorite place to go for this antidote to my pride was my wife's family farm in Kansas. I used to love to walk and pray in the stubble of the wheat fields after wheat harvest in June and see the flat farmland far as you could see on the horizon and feel that stiff Kansas wind from the south and feel the greatness of God in my smallness. I love to go out after dark, my wife, and look up at the sky and see the Milky Way, the meteor showers without interference from the light pollution in the city and be overwhelmed by the greatness of God and my smallness. This practice helped guard my heart against pride. Well, the favor and the kindness of God in season 4 paves the way for the 2,360.7 miles from Cleveland to San Diego for season 5 of my life. Spoiler alert, a plot twist is coming. I was invited to become senior pastor of this church by a 97% vote of their 113-year-old church. And here are some excerpts I'm going to read to you from the church's published history as written by a third-generation member and elder in the church right now. And I quote, this is describing the church I went to lead. The splintered church, with its tribes and factions, refused to be unified. The church struggled to find a new pastor and, with a brief exception, was without a lead pastor for almost a decade. Unfortunately, the lack of a single individual who could lead the church day in and day out eventually led to ministries becoming siloed, and over time, these silos became factions. While from the outside, the church appeared stable and actually experienced slight growth, internally, fractures were beginning to form. By this point, the church had earned a reputation. Can you imagine that? And there weren't many who were willing to accept the church that had been leaderless. But in 2006, in 2006, Pastor Carlton Harris accepted the position. This was the beginning of a difficult period for everyone. Amen. And though God had still been using the church for his purpose, there were numerous toxic aspects of the church which ran to its core. Pastor Carlton began his work of removing the silos and reunifying the church, and this meant making unpopular changes and removing power from the factions which were dividing the church. And in May 2010, a special unification Sunday was held, which joined the various services together as one. Attendance tumbled as the sickness that had grown in the decade prior was addressed. In the same period, the Great Recession struck, and giving dropped precipitously as members lost their jobs. Pastor Carlton worked to unify the church and led through several difficult periods. All these things, paired with the COVID-19 pandemic, occurred before he left in 2021, end quote. Now you know the plot twist in my life. Between the fun of season 4 and the pain and trauma of season 5. Your heart will experience different temptations in different seasons of your life. My primary temptation to guard my heart against in season 4 was pride. My primary temptations, yes, there's an S on the end of that, to guard my heart against in season 5 were the temptations to be discouraged, to be anxious, to doubt that God is good, the temptation to be angry, the temptation to wallow in self-pity, the temptation to be impatient. And did I already say the temptation to throw in the towel and walk away from leading that church or any church? Those were dog years for me. Almost 16 years felt like 112 years with a COVID bonus added. Do you feel me? So how did I guard my heart in this darkest of nights? I'll offer you several of the things that I did. I repeatedly reminded myself that God instructed me to guard my heart. Not anyone else's heart, my heart. I paid attention to the direction of my heart by spending time in regular quiet reflection. I started the habit of doing postmortems each day of my life. And the insight that we have into other people's hearts comes in direct proportion to the time we spend reflecting on our own hearts. I was honest with God about how I was feeling. I didn't neglect the deeper inner conversations, and so this is where journaling was helpful in guarding my heart from denial or minimization. I put words to what I was feeling and thinking, and I processed what I was experiencing. The pain was real. In fact, I'd like to, since I trust you, I'm going to read to you a couple of entries from my journal. Saturday, February 6th, 2011. Today is a beautiful, sunny, warm day, headed into the 70s. What's new in San Diego? I'm sitting at the dining room table looking out on, and I could look out over the city from where we lived. And I said, the last 7 to 10 days have been very difficult for me, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. I found myself feeling depressed, discouraged, anxious, concerned, fearful, lethargic. Several mitigating factors have led to this. My 5-year anniversary. I had hoped to be further down the road to health and kingdom impact. I am feeling the drain of 5 years here. It has been indescribably draining. I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of dysfunction and sin and idolatry, and I want to believe that God is enough. And I cry internal tears almost daily, and external tears at times. I have been deeply hurt here. I'll read you another. God, I am tired. I cannot go on and lead anymore unless you show up with great power. July 7th of the same year. I feel hopeless, drained, empty, weary, and fatigued after 5.5 years of intense struggle. I want to bear fruit for you that is abundant and lush. Please, please come, Lord. One final one. It was 6 years ago this weekend that I candidated. It feels like 16 years ago. It seems so long since I felt effective as a leader and energized, so long since I was living my dream and having fun as a pastor. What happened? I should have known 6 years ago today that I would be headed to jail like Joseph, that I was headed into a season of dreaming being put on hold like Joseph's 13 years. I could have never anticipated the pain I've endured, the life and passion being sucked out of my soul. That was my life. So in the midst of that, the next thing I did is I fought for joy. Each day I would spend time writing about the good things from my day, and Bob Merritt beautifully alluded to this morning. Think about memories that made me smile, and even when they were like the great theologian Alexander would say, were horrible, terrible, no good, very bad days. It's a great story. I prayed the Bible back to God during one particularly dark night of the soul. I read Psalm 86 over and over and over. If that's where you are, I highly recommend it. I confessed my personal sin to God. I've shared some of that with you already. I'll just say this, my sins are many, but his mercy is more. I enjoyed the gift of safe, transparent relationships where I could be seen and known, and arguably, this is the most important. This is the way to guard your heart, but not suffocate it. So I solicited and I listened to feedback from trusted people in my life who I knew loved me and were for me, like this brother who introduced me. I'll tell you a story, show you how messed up I am. One Sunday I was landing the sermon and making the point of the passage, and several people got up to start leaving. before the service ended, because it was about time for it to end, and I don't know what was going on in their hearts. Maybe they wanted to get to the restaurant before everyone else. I don't know. But in that moment, I snapped. And I said something like, "I'm not done yet. Don't leave like you always do." Whoa, yeah. Imagine you're on your way out and I say that, you go, "Is he talking to me?" I'm sorry, I have a nickname, the Weeping Prophet. Jeremiah is my favorite character in the Bible. I just cry. So I said, "I'm not done yet, don't leave like you always do," but I didn't say it that kindly. So in that moment, I felt justified in my rebuke, partly because of how I was being treated by not all, but many of these people. And a few days later, I was at our small group gathering with my wife and about a dozen other people we were doing life with, and I trusted them. And I knew they loved me and that they were for me. And so I remember that Tim and Logan were there, and I think David and Jason were there too. And I asked, "Hey, were you guys in the worship service when I snapped in frustration?" And they looked at me and went, "Yes." Then I asked, "Do you feel like I need to apologize next Sunday?" And without hesitation, they said, "Yes." And I did. I got up and I owned it. Their input helped me guard my heart from a seed of bitterness. I want to show you a photograph. August 1st, 2007 was a hot Wednesday evening in Minneapolis at the height of evening rush hour. And then the next photo shows you this I-35 bridge. It was full of cars. When at 6:05 p.m., it began to shake. And then the unthinkable happened. The bridge collapsed, resulting in the deaths of 13 people and injuries to 145 others. And the collapse led to an investigation and a search for the cause and highlighted the need for bridge inspections and repairs. This was the first piece of the bridge to fail when that massive piece of infrastructure collapsed. These small gusset plates were too thin to support the weight of that massive bridge. There's a great lesson for us here, for me, for you. Don't leave your heart unguarded. Don't let your heart get too thin to support the weight of your life. Don't neglect giving attention to the maintenance and the repairs that your heart needs, because what's in here will come out everywhere. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything that you do flows from it. Just know this: I am you. As C.S. Lewis said, think of me as a patient in the same hospital who, having been admitted a little earlier, has something to share. I am you. I have my ups, I have my downs. You know about season 4, and you know about season 5. Guard your heart. I want you to know that I love you, I am for you. I'm so proud of you all. I'm so thankful for you. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for putting up with my weeping. Just thank you. God is so kind to me through you. As I would say to my church week after week, I love you, and there there's nothing